land acknowledgement. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Master Gardener presentation. Succulents for the Sacramento Valley by Fitz. I'm going to read the land acknowledgement statement and then pass it off to Sue. We should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered for this meeting. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people, including the Yocha Dehe Winton Nation today. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be gathered here today on their traditional lands. Okay, it's all yours, Sue.
Okay, hi, I'm Sue Fitz. I'm a master gardener for Yolo County. I've been a master gardener for 5 or 6 years now. I've been growing succulents fairly intensively for the last 10. And my interest is in growing them outside as landscape plants rather than in dish gardens like I see a lot of people do. And I've gotten a lot of comments from people saying that they're interested in that topic too. So that's one reason why I created this presentation. I'm going to go at a fairly quick speed, and it's going to be really hard to take notes. So I have a handout. And if you will quick write my email address down here, and then after the talk, you can email me and put handout on the subject line, and I will send you the handout. I can't figure out any other way. At least I'm not Zoom literate enough to figure out another way to get it to you. So quick, get that address down and we'll get started. Okay. The main thing that finally got me off my tush to make this a talk is about 5 or 6 years ago, a neighbor down the street during Thanksgiving vacation, I drove by and I saw him planting a good size, like maybe 15-gallon sticks on fire in his front yard. It looked gorgeous. But I just kind of cringed because I knew that in about 2 more weeks, we were going to probably have our, it's usually when we get our hard freeze. That's the first one. And I didn't think it was going to make it. And it was a pile of mush 2 weeks later, like I thought. This is why. It just simply can't tolerate temperatures below 32 degrees. Yet this poor guy who probably didn't know any better went to a local nursery and there it was for sale. Which is kind of a problem with succulents. The problem with succulents is that there's this area of Southern California that's very mild. It's got very warm winter temperatures and it's cool in the summer relatively. And this is right about here is where the majority of succulent wholesalers grow their stock. And matter of fact, here I found a little map that showed where all of the wholesalers are in California. And as you can see, they're right where it's really nice and mild. So, and why is it that they're selling unsuitable succulents to us? Well, the thing is that 75% of California's population is along the coast where the weather is where succulents really like it. Wholesalers are going to want to provide plants for their largest market possible so that they, get the most money. They sell these succulents to large chain stores that are up and down the state. And unfortunately, we're somewhat of an outlier in the Central Valley. And we get plants that are really meant for the Bay Area and for Southern California. And the chain store buyers don't know any different, and they buy these plants because that's what's offered to them, and then we go and buy them, and the plants just either fry or die from the cold. So it's really, if you don't know what you're doing, you can waste a lot of money and get really discouraged trying to keep succulents alive out in the garden. As an example, in terms of temperature, that's the temperature right here that the succulent that the wholesalers are growing their plants at, and this is us here in zone 9B. So you can see that we're almost 10 degrees cooler or colder in the winter than where they're being grown, which doesn't work well sometimes. And then heat-wise, They are right here where it's, you can see it's a lot. They don't get many hot days, and then we're right here, and we're more along in here where we get a ton of hot days. So we're really not in a good climate to grow succulents outdoors. But I mean, I don't want to be too much of a Debbie Downer. It doesn't mean that we can't grow them at all. This is kind of a taxonomy map of the various families that have succulent uh, species in them. And out of all of these, we can grow this many succulents from these various genera. So it's not, we do get some that we can grow. So I decided to just divide this up by family. And the first family we're going to discuss is the agave family, which involves these 5 genuses. And this is where agaves are normally grow in the wild. As you can see, some of them are along the coast, and this is also tropical here. So you kind of get a clue that probably not all agaves are going to be hardy. They're either not going to want the heat because they're on the coast, or they're not going to want the cold because they're in the middle of the tropical area. But there's agaves up over here which are in climates really similar to ours. So you just have to figure out which ones will work. Agaves are really variable as to size. They come bigger than a human being and so small that they can grow in a small pot. I think a lot of people kind of shy away from agaves just because they think they're really big, but that's just because agave americana, which is the most common agave, just happens to be the one that's the most popular because it's the toughest. And everybody thinks, well, if I grow an agave, it's going to take over my yard. But there's a lot of agaves that are small and have a lot of interesting characteristics that I think make them really worthwhile in the yard. Here's just a few desirable cultivars. Most of these are 3 or 4 feet, maybe even as little as 2 feet in diameter and height, so they'll fit nicely in the yard. You can see they've got interesting shaped leaves. They've got variegation on them. I think they're a real asset to the garden. So in terms of knowing which ones to get, in the resources, there's a man in Davis who's got a blog, and he adores agaves, and he's got an actual list on his blog as to which ones he's found to be hardy in our area and do well. So I'm going to give that out with the resources, and you can check out his list. The one thing you need to watch out for with agaves is this is the most common agave, I swear, sold. It's attenuata, the foxtail agave. This one will not grow here. You'll see it all the time in the big box stores, but it's definitely a zone 10 plant and will turn to mush if you try to grow it. So beware of that one. The other thing to beware of agaves is that there is this weevil that attacks agaves. It's down in Southern California, and you have to consider that most of the agaves that are sold in stores come from Southern California, and I'm sure that the wholesalers do their best to try to keep this out of their pots, but it's always not a bad idea when you buy an agave from a store that you unpot it and really check it over carefully. What they do is that they get into to the base of the agave where there's a huge starch reservoir and sort of hide in there. And if you miss one and you've got one, you'll see it, because what will happen is the plant will just suddenly start to die and decompose. The treatment for this is this, or at least this is what everybody down south does with their agaves. This is a 12-month systemic, and they dose it with this every spring, and that's the way they can keep their agaves going. It may be something we may wind up having to do with our agaves eventually. The next genus is Manfreda, which is found in Texas and the upper part of Mexico. It's kind of a cool plant. It's got these spots on it, which are really interesting. It is, like I said, it's an agave relative, but it doesn't die when it blooms. And the other thing it can do is it will go dormant during the winter and disappear and then come back. But it's kind of an interesting plant, and it does well here. You just don't see them very often. Now, nature did something interesting, and it crossed a mangave with a manfreda because they were in the same locale, and they created something that's been nicknamed a mangave. And these are basically hybrids between whichever agave somebody wants to cross them with, and they really look different because it just depends on which agave relative it was crossed with. Some of them can be frost sensitive. This one here I think is Lavender Lady, and this one is crossed with that agave I mentioned that is real common, that's too tender for here. And the mangave itself is borderline hardy here. So again, you just kind of have to, the guy whose blog I mentioned for the agaves also has a list of, if you go on his blog, he has trialed a lot of manfredas, or sorry, mangaves, and he can, you can look at that and see which ones he recommends that are doing well in our area. This is the one that started it all. This was a natural cross that a plant hunter found. And I've actually got this one in my own garden, and it looks just like this. It's a big, happy plant, no pokies on it at all, and it's flowers every year. Yuccas are agave relatives, which I didn't realize until I put this talk together. There's different forms of agaves. There's shrub agaves. There's agaves that are basically short stemmed and close to the ground. There's multiple trunkers, there's single trunkers. They're an interesting group of plants. They seem to do well in our area. But the only thing I suggest to people when I tell them to consider a yucca is that they don't disappear when you get tired of them. They're very persistent, and no matter how many times you cut them back, the only times I've been able to completely eliminate them is to just literally soak the ground with stump killer, which I hate doing. But so think twice before you plant a yucca that you're really going to want to keep it there, because they're really hard to get rid of if you change your mind. Another agave relative is the Dazzlerion. Dazzlerion wheeleri is pretty common in our area. This is what the leaves look like. They've got little barbs on them all along. You've probably seen it. One that isn't grown here very often, but I think is really gorgeous, is Longtissimum. It looks like a fiber optic sculpture. It doesn't have the little sharp edges, and it's really a well-grown one. Looks like I said, a fiber optic sculpture. They do bloom without dying, but they have to be fairly old before they do. So it'll take a long time before you see a bloom stalk. Hesperaloes are also in the agave family. I think these are common enough that most people know what they are. They're nice because they bloom for a really long time. Hummingbirds really like them. They're well behaved. They don't have any diseases or problems. I'd say if there's only one negative thing about them is that they're kind of slow growing and take quite a while to get up to size. But I find if you fertilize them, it really does help them grow faster. There's a different species besides the parviflora that we're used to. This is called Phanifera. It's much larger. And these have actually been crossed with parviflora and created a bunch of different hybrids that are kind of intermediate in size. There's different colors. There's a yellow that's quite common in Texas, but it hasn't made its way over to California. I see it once in a blue moon, but it's not all that common, although it should be available if you really look hard. Oops. And then this is a hybrid between the two species. You can see it's much larger than parviflora, and it's even the stalks are much longer. So we're going out of the agaves now, and we're going into the aloe family. There's two common aloe or Asphodelaceae genuses that we grow. It's aloes of bulbines, And aloes, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of, there's not as many that there, I'd say about maybe a quarter of aloes are hardy. So you're taking your chances when you buy an unknown aloe that it's not going to make it here. Generally, the bigger they are, the more likely they are to be hardy. If you want to visually see what does well here, you can go to UCD and walk around the campus, because Ernesto Sandoval, who runs the UCD Botanical Conservatory, loves aloes, and he has planted them throughout the campus. So that's one way of figuring out what you can or can't grow. Just so people know, the biggest, that if you're trying to figure out whether a plant you're looking at is an agave or an aloe, one way you can tell is that agaves never have spines on the leaves other than on the edges. And if you see something like this, you'd know right away that that's an aloe. And also, if you snap the leaf off and it snaps cleanly and just oozes gel, that's an aloe. If you try to snap the leaf off and you can't because it's got a lot of fibers in it, that's an aloe. It's an agave. So aloes are basically from Africa. They're most concentrated in South Africa. And what's interesting is that they're pollinated by sunbirds. And what's kind of interesting is that the tip of South Africa, this is the area that has the Mediterranean climate. And as you can see here, that's the area that has some of the most number of interesting aloes. So there's definitely going to be aloes that we can grow. So some of the more desirable species that are easy to find and easy to grow here are aloe arborescens, which is can grow into a low shrub over time. Blooms in spring, and it's a real hummingbird favorite. Aloe striata is blooming right now, and you'll see it in various landscapes. It doesn't tend to sucker, so it tends to be just one single plant. Aloe martholothi is interesting because it has sideways blooming stalks, and it's what's called a tree aloe. It just has a single trunk and gets pretty tall. For summer blooming aloe, most of the aloes bloom in spring, but there's some that will bloom in summer. Aloe nobilis is a summer bloomer. I was just looking at my nobilis the other day, and it's just starting to form flower buds deep down into the plant. Will probably be in bloom in about a month. There's aloes that can be problematic. Everybody wants to grow aloe vera for the burn and irritation chemicals that it has in its leaves. It's not really hardy here. If you get a really nice warm microclimate, you can keep it alive, but if you plant it out in the middle of your yard and we have a hard freeze, you're probably going to lose it. If you happen to, this one isn't very common, but occasionally you'll see it. Polyphylla is stunningly beautiful, but it actually grows on the side of a mountain and is not used to our heat. So you can grow it in the Bay Area, but here it's not liable to make it, and they're usually expensive, so it's not worth wasting your money. And then there's tons and tons of what I call little tiny dish garden aloes. Almost all of those are not hardy, so they'd also be too small to grow in a landscape anyway. But they're cute, but they're stuck in pots. One problem that has started to move up here, it's just starting to show up. It's pretty much of a problem down in Southern California. There's a mite that attacks aloes now, and it looks like this gross tissue that attaches onto the plant. The mites are really slow moving, and if you catch your plant early enough and dig it up and throw it out, you'll probably keep it off the rest of your aloes. But definitely, if you buy a brand new aloe, you should probably keep an eye on it for a while to make sure it doesn't show this. And I actually did buy an aloe from Home Depot about 3 years ago and wound up having to throw it out because it did start showing this. So it is a possibility that you're going to keep an eye out for this, or you're going to have problems. As far as I know, there's no cure for it. You just have to get rid of it. Now, bull beans are one of my favorite succulents. They're so foolproof. they actually have the same chemical that aloe vera has in them. So if you don't want to worry about having your aloe vera freeze, you can grow bull beans instead and use the sap from the leaves in the same way. Uh, so you've probably seen these around. They're both, these are the two most common forms I've seen. This is the actual species. It blooms in spring, has really nice long yellow flowers for about 2 months. Very vigorous, makes a great ground cover. The orange form is called Hallmark, and it blooms a lot longer. It blooms most of the year. Actually, it takes a break during the hottest part of the year and during the coldest part of the year, but I'd say it probably blooms about 8 months out of the year. And it's unusual in that most of our honeybees don't really care for South African plants. They don't tend to collect pollen or nectar from them, but they really like this bulbing Hallmark. Now, the rest of the succulents I'm going to be talking about are from the succulent Karoo in Africa. It's a cool desert. It's actually a desert right on the coast of Africa, just above South Africa. I think it even extends into the actual country of South Africa. It's interesting in that it's warm enough that it doesn't freeze during the winter, but it doesn't get as hot as some deserts are. So this is the source for a lot of the plants that are an issue in terms of when I was saying that, the San Diego County is a similar climate to what they're used to. And it runs along the coastline here and then down into South Africa. And this is where things like jade plants and all kinds of things come from that we just don't think about. It's not a good idea to put them out in the yard. This is kind of the way it looks, at least in the spring. So I'm just going to go through each family that has some succulent forms of it. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Senecio, which they're usually called chalk sticks. This blue chalk sticks is very common, and it's very hardy, and it does make a nice ground cover, but it's not quite thick enough to keep weeds down. This is an unusual aloe in the back, which is available. Instead of being a rosette, it forms fans. It's a plicatus, I believe. So that's a really nice aloe if you can find one. Okay, this Senecio actually forms a good-sized shrub. I didn't think it was hardy, but I've been trialing it for the last 4 or 5 years, and it hasn't froze. And it takes full sun, so it's worth a try. There's a lot of euphorbias. There's 2 species in the euphorbia family, or 2 genuses in the euphorbia family that we can grow. One's the true euphorbia, and the other is Petulanthes, which is an American genus. I think that taxonomists are in the middle of dissolving this and putting all of these back into euphorbia, but for now, I believe it's still, the genus still exists. So most euphorbias are from dry tropical areas. They do really, really well in Southern California. You'll see all kinds of euphorbias, big tree ones, little ones, all kinds of interesting ones. The one that my neighbor managed to kill, but they're all so tropical, it's really hard to find a euphorbia that we can grow. By trials, I have found that these 3 are hardy here. Resinifera is actually native to Morocco and is almost Mediterranean preferring climate. It does really well, but it grows really slowly. This one is almost like a fan of twigs. It has little leaves on it in the spring, but generally it's leafless, and it just looks like a radiating pile of sticks. And Euphorbia horrida just forms a big clump of big fat cactusy looking stems. Now you'll see euphorbias like this being sold at big box stores. Now they look really cool, but these are the ones that you can grow in Southern California, but they just won't survive here, and they're usually sold in 5-gallon cans for quite a bit of money. So I would highly recommend just avoiding them unless you want to grow them as an indoor plant, because they're not going to make it. And then good old sticks on fire. This thing doesn't survive here either, although it's stunning and it forms huge bushes in Southern California. But we're out of luck on these. Now, Petalanthus is kind of an interesting species or genus. They're native to the Americas. They're usually in the Southwest or northern Mexico. They look like upright stems and have these really pretty flowers a good part of the year, and hummingbirds really like them. I've read that they're hardy to 28 degrees, but I have been growing them for 3 or 4 years now and out in the open, and they have survived. So I think that you might be able to drop that by a degree or two lower. So these are the two most common species to find. The macrocarpus is actually the more common in Southern California. I have found that this one did die on me. The Bracteus is looks like it would be something that would be more succulent and more likely to die, but this one's actually growing quite vigorously in my yard, and it looks just like this. It's really a kind of a nice plant. This one here is actually, I threw it in with the Petalanthus because it looks like a Petalanthus. It's technically a euphorbia. It's a native to Baja California. It has twiggy, it looks like twigs like these, but then in the spring it has these gorgeous pink clusters all over it that last for 2 or 3 months. I have it in a pot and it blooms just fine, a huge pot out from under my eaves, so it gets direct frost and sun, and it doesn't seem to care. It can run though, which is one reason why I put it in a pot. I was a little afraid. I've seen this in Southern California, and it forms huge clumps. So I just thought, I don't know if I want to deal with that. So I stuck it in a pot. But if you got the space, it would be fun to turn it loose. Now we're moving on to the Portulaca family. There's 2 genuses that we can grow in that family. The first one, the Calendrinia, is the rock purslane that's really caught on and is all over now. You see this all over now. And I grabbed this picture because it had a nice picture of the rock purslane in it. But I was looking at it and I was thinking, gosh, you know, every single plant in here that's a succulent is something we can grow, and it's how they did such a nice landscaping job with it. I mean, here's blue chalk sticks, and here's Aloe striata, and the rock purslane. This is the jelly bean sedum, which does well here. It looks like there's a couple of more aloes here, but you could recreate this landscape with what we're able to grow. Now, the other Portulaca relative that we can grow is Portulacaria afra. There's a variegated and a non-variegated form. This forms a low spreading shrub. It's just borderline hardy. I would say 10 years ago, you couldn't leave this out over the winter and it would die, but it's gotten so much warmer in the last 10 years in the winter that it's now surviving pretty well. I have a Portulacaria, the variegated form, over at the high school I volunteer at, and it's out in the open, and it's 3 years old and it looks just fine. So it's something that you might be taking a chance on to grow, but they're usually not very expensive. So if you lose it, you're not losing much, but it's kind of a fun plant. Its common name is elephant food because that's what elephants like to eat in Africa. It's an African plant. Now we're going to go into the Crassulaceae. This is the family that has the most of the succulents that are borderline hardy. Kind of have to pick and choose through here as to which ones we can grow or not. My favorite is the genus Cotyledon. The most common cotyledon that you'll see is Orbiculata. It's very variable. These are all the same species. It's just different leaf forms. This is what the plant looks like normally. It can be gray or it can be green. This one's called elk horn because I guess it looks like antlers. And I forget the name of what the finger form is. I think it might be finger orbicular, but these are all very nice plants that do really well in the landscape. They're big enough to make an impact. They don't have any problems. They're well behaved. I really highly recommend them. They have these, everything in the Crassulaceae has these really gorgeous bill-like flowers in the spring. There's a couple of other species. This one is been, plant breeders have been working on this one for a while, and I've been seeing all kinds of cultivars that obviously have a strong amount of this one's blood in it. I find that they're hardy to winter, but they fry in the sun. So if you can give them afternoon shade, they look really quite nice. Macantha is a completely different species. Again, it's really pretty, but it really can't take full sun in the height of summer. So if you can give it some afternoon shade, it does really well. Now, the true Crassula genus, there's almost nothing in this genus that we can grow outside. This is the genus that jade plant is in. And the only two ones I've trialed and have succeeded with is this one's called String of Buttons, and this one's called Pagoda plant, I think. So they're very common. You can pick these up almost anywhere. So the Tetragona gets big enough to make an impact in the garden. The Perforata is so low growing and so small. I mean, you would want to put it like right in the front of your succulent border so that you could see it. It's just too tiny to put in the back. Now, sedums are also in the Crassulaceae family. The sedums, most sedums are hardy. They take cold really well. The only problem is that they don't take the heat. Most of them are from areas that are fairly cool. They're either by the coast or they're on mountains or farther up north. So I find that they tend to fry on me. These four are four I've trialed that will take a good amount of sun as long as they get a little extra water. And the Prealtum is that one that everybody grows. I mean, nobody buys this. You just ask a neighbor if you can have a piece of it. It's kind of a shrubby, succulent one with yellow flowers in the spring. Everybody knows pork and beans, or this one can burn. If mine burned when we got those 108-degree days last summer, but in the normal course of things, it usually is okay with it around 100. Is probably it's getting a little warm. They kind of just get a little brown, but they're pretty happy here. The sedum alba is a really low-growing, creeping ground cover. As long as you give it enough water, it seems to be okay. And the Mexican sedum confusum does really well, but it likes a little bit of shade in the hottest part of the day. Graptopetalums, there's really just one species. It's a gorgeous plant in its own right. If you give it enough water, it can take full sun. If you want to really be chintzy with the water, you better give it some afternoon shade, or it's going to kind of dry up and not look as pretty. What's nice about this plant is that it is hardy. It takes frost really well, and what's nice is that it crosses with a lot of other different genuses and gives that hardiness to some of other plants that we not normally be able to grow, but we can grow the hybrids. So its common nickname is ghost plant. Now here's a cross between Graptopetalum and a sedum, Vera Higgins. This one does pretty well in our area. Again, if it gives enough water, you can keep it out in full sun. Graptiovera is a cross between Graptopetalum and an Echevera. Fred Ives, it's very common. This is actually, the leaves get bigger the more shade you give it. This one's been in full sun. I can tell the leaves are pretty narrow, but the leaves get really wide, and the plant looks pretty impressive if you give it a little bit of shade during the hottest part of the day. These are pretty easy to find. Now, let's talk about Echeveras. They're gorgeous plants, but we're not in a good situation for them. First of all, you can see that a lot of them are in tropical areas, and then they're along the coast. So basically what that means is that they can't stand the frost, and then they can't stand the heat. So trying to find an echeveria that will grow well here is iffy. I only know two species that do okay. One is the common hen and chicks, Echeveria imbricata. You can see here that it's growing babies. The plants, what you do is when you stick a rosette in the ground, it'll root. Then the next year, if you peek underneath it, it's got tons of babies, and you can detach these and keep spreading it out so it becomes a blanket. When I first started growing succulents 10 years ago, I was able to grow these out in full sun with enough water, but now they just dry up. I've had to move them all over into afternoon shade. It's just getting too hot. The other species that seems to be okay with a fair amount of sun is Agravoides. It's really, it's really on the small side for being an outside landscape type of plant. It doesn't offset very quickly, even though imbricata isn't a whole lot bigger, because it offsets and creates a big colony. It makes more of a statement in the garden. This one doesn't really do it. But if you really want to try to get some echeverias in your garden, this would be one to try. Now, I'm going to talk about sempervibrums just really briefly. They're very beautiful, and they are offered for sale a lot, but this is where they're from. And if you notice that they're on the tops of mountains, they are really an alpine species, and they don't like our heat from our summers. And in the winter, they're dormant, and they don't want water during the winter too much. When it's winter where they normally live, the ground is frozen, so they aren't really exposed to moisture on their roots during the winter. And so with our wet winters and our really hot summers, they really don't do well. They're stunningly beautiful, but these really should stay in a pot. It's just not really. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you'd be really struggling against their nature to try to get them to grow in your garden. Oops, missed a spot. So aeoniums, I think they're really common around here. Almost everybody knows what an aeonium is. They're from the Canary Islands, which is this little group of islands off the coast of Africa. There's also, I think, a few species that grow along the coast of, I think this is Morocco. I'm not the best person for African nations. They come in two forms. One's what's called a tree form, where they grow almost like a bouquet of flowers. They have really long stems with a rosette on the top of them. And then there's the Halberthii type form, where the stem, it forms a ball of rosettes. And of the two of them, the Halberthia form is actually much tougher. It takes frost a lot better, and it takes heat a lot better, and even full sun. The Arboreum, what happens with it is that during the summer it goes dormant, because it is a Mediterranean plant, and that's how it survives the long hot summer. And it doesn't look very good, and secondly, if you water it when it's asleep like this, you can rot the roots out. So I have found the simplest way to keep the arboreums types happy is to grow them in shade, and they actually don't go dormant if they get enough shade and water in the summer, which is nice. They look good instead of like this. But I suggest that if you can, try to get some of the Haworthia hybrids. I think most people know Aeonium kiwi, and that's a variegated form of Haworthia. They also, by the way, just are really prone to mealybugs, so keep an eye out for that. Kalanchoes are another species where there's a ton of them. They look gorgeous down in Southern California, where they can form almost big shrubs, but they're just too tender for us. I've gotten two species to grow happily here. This one's called flapjack plant or paddle plant, Thyreisa flora. It has bell-like flowers like this as well, but it's a nice little plant. And then this one is not very often seen, but it's tough as nails. It's Marianeriana, and it forms a really dense ground cover that no weeds can get through. And then most of the spring, it's got this gorgeous bells of flowers on it. The only place I've seen who's offering it for sale is Morning Sun Herb Farm has it if you are interested, but it's one of the very, very few kalanchoes I've seen that is hardy. But it is a nice plant, takes full sun, takes frost. Now we're going to talk about the true cactuses. What makes a cactus and not is they have these areolas that are these little pads with the spines on them. They can be any kind of shape and size. And the true cactuses are native to the New World, and this is their range. As you can see, I put this equator line here just so you can see that a lot of them grow fairly close to the equator, which means that a lot of them aren't hardy. I mean, they can take full sun, but they can't take frost. So you've got to be kind of picky when you're trying to figure out which ones you can grow. I decided to group them more by their shape than by their genuses on discussing them. Most of the barrel cactuses are hardy. They are slow growing, but they do eventually get up to an impressive enough size to actually be a good landscape plant. The one I see the most is Lattice spinus here, but there are others. The golden barrel cactus isn't technically a true barrel cactus, but it looks enough like them and acts like them enough that they usually get grouped under that. While these are very common in Southern California, they're a little tricky to grow here. They are very sensitive to rotting in the winter. And, you know, Southern California only gets like 5 to 7 inches of rain a year, where we're getting more like 15 or so, if not more. So you got to put them someplace where they're really well drained, like on the side of a slope or someplace. Plant them in gravel or something so that they don't rot out, but they will grow here. Again, they're kind of slow. If you're going to grow a golden barrel, I would try to get one that's as big as possible when you buy it, so that you don't have to wait forever for it to get up to size. And then the prickly pears. One nice thing about prickly pears is that most of them are hardy, so you don't have to worry too much about that, but a lot of them do get really big, so you've got to kind of take that into account. But they have all kinds of spines. You can have ones that have just really hellacious spines, little tiny spines, no spines, twisty spines, furry spines. They're kind of fun to try to get different samples. And the spines are, if you go back here, you see these little tiny dots. Those don't look like much, but if you look at what's going on here, there are these little tufts. And this is what those tufts look like under a microscope. And you can see they're barbed, just like a fish hook. And when you get one of these in you, you can't pull it out very easily, because it's just going to be, you're going to be, going against the barbs. If you do manage to get your hand into a prickly pear and come out covered with spines, what I recommend you do is try some duct tape. Just slap some duct tape on and yank the duct tape off, and a lot of times it gets rid of 99% of them. It's better just not to plant them where people will be touching them. The petals can vary into shape and size. You can have ones that are perfectly round. You can have them that are actually cylindrical. They can become crested. This is actually the crested form of this one. This one is fairly common, seen as for sale as a crest, and it is really pretty. This one's called the ox tongue species, because it looks like a cow's tongue. So you can get a lot of variation just on that. Height-wise, there's really low-growing species that are almost ground covers, and then there's ones that are so big that they're like large oleanders. So you might want to be careful when you buy one that you know how big it's going to get. And now we're moving on to what I call the columns. The column types of cactuses tend to be more tender, so it's harder to find ones that can take our climate. Spatchiana here is pretty common, and it's really easy to grow. It tends to have pieces fall off of it all the time. So you can probably knock on somebody's door and just ask, oh, I noticed that your Spatiana has dropped a column. Can I have it? And I'm sure they will probably say yes, but I don't have to pick it up and deal with it. There's other forms. There's Peruviana, there's Pachioi. One thing about the columnar cactuses is that a few of them have mescaline in them, and you may find if you plant your, especially your Echinopsis Pachioi right next to the sidewalk, you may find it gone one day because there's enough hallucinogenic in it that people will take them. They all have these gorgeous, huge flowers that are about the size of a dinner plate almost, and they bloom almost every year, so you get a nice show, and they're blooming just about now. There's the Trichosierras are a little bit smaller. They probably don't get more than 2 to 3 feet high, and they've been bred for some really stunning flower shows. Again, mostly in May and June. And these little hedgehog cactuses, they tend to hide around rocks so that they're not easy to see until they flower, and they're really pretty when they flower. But to be honest, they don't look all that attractive when they're not in bloom, but they're at least another option. So that's basically the list of ones I have found that can be grown here pretty well. Just some tips. Drainage is really important. It's a good idea to plant your plants on a mound. It's best to give them really good drainage. Most cactuses and succulents don't really like a lot of organic matter in their soil. What they really want is just basically gravel. I have found that decomposed granite works like a charm. I just dump a pile of decomposed granite on the ground, shape it into a berm, and plant right into it, and things just go crazy. It's really the best way I have found to grow them. And if you have something that's iffy in terms of it's borderline hardy, if you can plant it in a microclimate that's a heat sink, like by a south or west wall, or by the sidewalk, or by your driveway, or another big, what you're doing is walls and concrete and asphalt hold heat overnight. They get warm during the day in winter, and then they radiate a little heat at night, and that keeps that area there a little bit warmer. And if you plant something that's borderline hardy in that sort of a situation, they'll kind of get through the winter because the heat from the radiation of the heat during the night keeps them going. You can do floating row covers. Although if they are really spiny, it can really shred floating row covers up. I found out the hard way. If you're going to get it's a good idea if you've got tender cactus and succulents out in the yard, you're pushing your envelope, keep an eye on the frost warnings. And if you just throw a sheet over them, I mean, I do this all the time. I probably throw sheets over things maybe 3 or 4 times during the winter when we have a really severe frost. My husband's always rolling his eyes. He says, it looks like it's Halloween out there. But it works. Unfortunately, all you have to do is miss one day and your plant's gone. The other thing is that if you manage to put something in where it's a little too hot for it, if you keep an eye out on the temperatures and throw a sheet over it during the heat wave, they do fine. Again, if you miss it, it's going to burn. I found that succulents do not like to have a drip emitter on them. They do much better being sprinkle irrigated, and I usually water mine about twice a month, but then again, mine are on decomposed granite, which drains really well, and that keeps them plump and happy. And if you're going to grow summer dormant plants, it's probably not a bad idea to group them together so that you can be a little more careful about not giving them water when you're actually watering. And actually, cactuses and succulents don't mind fertilizer. They'll actually grow very quickly if you give them fertilizer. But what I do is if I buy them and they're smaller than I want, I will fertilize and water them a lot until they get up to the size I want them to be at. And then I back off and give them less water and fertilizer, and that keeps them at the size I want. If you do fertilize, what I usually use is just something like Miracle Grow, and then just quick rinse it off the plants after I hose it on them. So that I'm kind of afraid that these salts will damage the waxy coating on the succulents and burn them. So I just rinse it off real quick afterwards. And as to watering, how much water, it really depends on if you're growing succulents because you're just trying to have something in the yard but use as little water as possible, you can keep them alive, but they're going to look like this. If you're growing succulents because you think they're beautiful and you want them to look really nice, the more water you can give them, the better they look. That's the only difference between here and here, is that this is probably getting water. This has probably been a little bit of afternoon shade and gets water probably twice a month. And these probably don't ever get water the whole summer. And that's kind of the result. And with your plants really unhappy, what it'll do is it'll curl up like this, trying to keep the center of the covered up and keep from being fried. If they're open like this, that means they're getting adequate water. If they're looking like this, you probably should give them a little more water, unless you just really don't care. Now, where to get cactuses? There's not a lot of cactus nurseries in our area. The closest one I know of is called Cactus Jungle in Berkeley, and it's a great place, but because it's in Berkeley, and Berkeley real estate prices are horrendous, the prices are really bad. They're unbelievable. I just kind of gasp sometimes when I walk through, but they really do have a nice selection. So if you don't care about cost, this is the place to go. Lone Pine Nursery is in Sebastopol. I've actually never gone to their nursery itself, but they sell. But if you go to they supply a lot of the little tiny 2-inch and 4-inch plants that you'll see in the nurseries. So you can buy their plants at local nurseries, or else you can go visit them in Sebastopol, which I swear I'm going to do sometime. You can get succulents really easily from like big box stores, but again, they're going to be getting plants that were bred to be for the Bay Area and Southern California. So you really got to look them up on your phone before you pay a lot of money for them. Make sure you're getting something that's hardy. Another good place in our area to get succulents are just local plant sales. The Arboretum has succulents. Woodland Community College sales have succulents. There's 2 cactus societies, cactus and succulent societies in Sacramento. They both have sales. You can mail order. And then my favorite is, my husband goes to conventions a lot in San Diego County, so I just talk him into driving down, and just while he's in his convention, I'm just hitting all of the local nurseries and just stuffing my car full of interesting succulents. But you have to kind of be really motivated to do that. Resources. So I was talking about Gerard Bach's Succulents and More blog. This blog is really worth going to. Like I said, he's actually got a list of agaves hardy in this area right on the front page of his blog. And he's really into mangaves, and he talks a lot about which ones do well here, so you can look through his blog for suggestions. The UCD Botanical Conservatory website has a list of aloes that are hardy in this area. Another website that's really nice is the Ruth Bancroft Garden website. This is a garden that was started by a woman named Ruth Bancroft in Walnut Creek. She loves succulents, and she has this, I think, garden's more than an acre, maybe a couple of acres, and it's all succulents. And you can check out their website, and also it's really worth going to that garden. It's only about an hour and a half away from here. And they have a nursery there too, so you can even do some shopping. And what's nice is that her garden's in zone 14, so if it's growing in her garden, we should be able to grow it. Another good resource is Deborah Lee Baldwin's website and videos. Now she is down in Southern California, so you have to take her recommendations and stuff with a grain of salt. But what I really like about her website is she shows some gorgeous gardens, and you get an idea as to what you can do landscaping wise with succulents. The other is Design for Serenity. Laura Eubanks is a designer who does nothing but cactus and succulent installations in Southern California. Again, she's using plants that a lot of them we can't use, but what's nice is you can see some great landscaping ideas on her YouTube videos. And this is, somebody wrote a book on Ruth Bancroft's garden, and you can buy this one, and it has a lot of plants that we can grow listed in it. The other book I recommend, this one's out of print. It's called Dry Climate Gardening with Succulents, but it's really worth trying to find. It's still available, I believe, on Amazon if you look. This would be a nice one for the library to buy if she can get it. It's basically the best succulent garden in the United States is Huntington Gardens down in the Pasadena area, and the people who run that cactus garden contributed heavily to this book, and they really list by each genus what plants what the temperature tolerances are on them. So it's a really good book to have. And that's it, guys. So I will be talking next, I guess 2 weeks from now, and what I'll be talking about next time is more how to create a cactus garden and succulent garden, what to do to make sure that they thrive, and then a little bit on how to just design wise, what looks good together and how to put it together, and other plants that grow well with succulents and cactus that kind of make it interesting. So that's,
Sue, you did have one question.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead, Mike.
I thought you were gone.
What?
I'm going to let Mike read it.
Oh, okay. I'm going, yeah.
So Jennifer asked, is Kalanchoe, I don't know why I'm reading this, Marniarana, also known as Kalanchoe panamensis. Annie's Annuals has the latter.
I haven't ever heard that. I mean, I would just Google it and see if it pops up as that. I have never heard it called anything else other than Marinariana. And besides, if I were you, I would get it from, I mean, it's going to cost a quarter of the price if you buy it at Morning Sun compared to Annie's these days. I mean, I like both nurseries, but Annie's prices have just really gone up to the unbelievable amount. And they're still fairly reasonable at Morning Sun, but I guess as a master gardener, I'm not probably even supposed to be recommending specific nurseries, but it's a hard plant to find. And like I said, the only place I've seen selling it is Morning Sun. I think I got mine. I just got, somebody gave me a piece of it, so I never had to buy it. So I'll just check my Google email in a few hours, and then I'll send off the handout to people who request it. And I guess we're more or less done.
Yeah, and again, Sue's email is the top of the chat. If you request the what's the handout consist of, Sue?
It's basically my talk. It'll list all of the plants that I suggested that will do well here, and the tips and tricks and the resources. I think it's worth it for the resources alone.
Yeah.
It's just a 2-page Word document. It's nothing super fancy, but I just know that when I am listening to a talk like this, I'm writing like crazy, trying to write down the names of all the plants, and then I'm missing stuff from that they were saying while I'm busy writing, and it's frustrating. What I usually do is hand out the handouts first thing when I give this talk, and then tell people, don't worry about taking notes. You got the information, but you get to see the pictures, and I give a little more information than what's on the handout. So.
Okay, great. Well, that'd be really useful. So, all right. Well, I'm sure you've realized that Sue knows a lot about succulents, and in 2 weeks on the 26th at 3 o'clock, she'll talk about practically how to use them in your garden. So
Okay.
Thanks for attending, everybody. Thanks, Joan. And
Sue?
so we'll hopefully
Yeah.
see you all in a couple of weeks.
Actually,
You
what
gave-
time is it? I can't tell. I can't see the time. How fast did I do that?
It's
You're
4
doing very
o'clock.
well. It is 4 o'clock. Perfect.
Well, I felt like I galloped through it, but whatever. At least I managed to get it in under an hour.
Yeah.
Hey, Sue, you gave out 2 emails. You gave out SueFitz@yahoo.com and then the one at Gmail. Which one do you prefer? We
Oh,
contact
shoot.
you.
I didn't. How in the world did that? It's the Gmail one. I was
Okay.
kind of trying to keep the Yahoo one under wraps because that's my real one.
Oh,
and
yeah. I
didn't
didn't even notice that. Okay. So
So
use the
it's-
Gmail one and forget Yahoo.
Yeah, you didn't see the Yahoo one.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, can I close
right.
out?
Bye, everybody. Happy
So-
gardening. See you in a couple of weeks.
Is it SueLFitz@gmail.com?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
There, stop share. I was wondering where the heck the button to get out of this.
Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
All
Thanks
right.
so much.
Thanks,
It was
Sue.
great.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.